Welcome to today's webinar series. I'm Alex Colvin, Dean of the ILR School at Cornell University. This is a webinar in a series, Equity in Focus, Job Creation for a Just Society. We're co-hosting it between the ILR School's Worker Institute and the U.S. Department of Labor's Women's Bureau, and it's a pleasure to be partnering with them again. This webinar series is bringing together researchers, policymakers, practitioners, advocates to share research and practice that addresses the need for a just economic recovery, but one that also reverses long existing inequalities in job creation access, with a particular focus on the impacts on women and people of color, and really trying to understand how that long-standing inequality intersects with the crises of the pandemic. Today, we're going to be focusing in on the issue of childcare and its relationship to work, and it's an essential need for parents in the workforce that we've really seen come to the fore during the pandemic. As we know, women make up the majority of childcare workers in America. And while parents struggle to pay for childcare services, the childcare workers themselves struggle with low wages and little or no access to benefits, essential aspects of job quality in this industry. So the question for today is, how can we reimagine a childcare system that meets the needs of families, that treats childcare workers with dignity? We want to improve access to childcare while also increasing job quality for childcare workers who are disproportionately women and people of color. I think we're going to have a very productive and informative conversation today, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from our speakers.
Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to the Worker Institute at Cornell for partnering with us and working every day to lift up these vitally important equity issues. And in this moment, when we have the opportunity to build back better. We're so excited to bring you this second webinar in our Equity in Focus series, discussing the intentional investments needed in the childcare sector so that it meets the needs of families while treating childcare workers with dignity. COVID has been the mirror, the stark reflection of challenges that women already faced in the workforce. It underscored just how threadbare our care infrastructure is. Many of those who left the labor force did so in order to provide care for their children. Even prior to the pandemic, many families faced difficulties securing and affording childcare, and this issue has only been amplified by the pandemic. People can't work if they don't have the security that their families are being cared for. But for generations, we have underinvested in the care economy. We've relied on unpaid and underpaid work of women, and particularly women of color, to care for our loved ones. Jobs that are typically held by men, like the construction industry, are paid better than childcare or elder care, where almost everyone is a woman. Yet both of these career tracks are necessary for our society and our economy to function. This pattern of highly gendered division of men and women into different types of jobs, this occupational segregation, is widespread across our society. The causes for it range from outright discrimination in hiring to subtle stereotypes and social norms that push women into particular fields of study and career pathways. The costs of occupational segregation are untenable. The Department of Labor just released a report bearing the cost, which shows that in a single year, segregation by industry and occupation cost Black women $39 billion and Hispanic women nearly $47 billion in lower wages compared to white men. We need to take this opportunity to rebuild our systems and our infrastructure to ensure that our economy works for all workers. We all want to live in a world where we have time to care for our families. We have a home that we love. We have a community where we thrive and a career where we are valued. And to achieve this, we must pay women fairly, have equitable access to affordable childcare, make sure that every job is a good job where people have a family-sustaining wage. They have sick time, they have paid leave, an opportunity to form a union and bargain collectively. Today's lineup of practitioners and advocates and policymakers will explore the challenges of the childcare industry, talk about innovative examples that are working to improve access to childcare, while also raising wages and increasing job quality for childcare workers, and launch a discussion on what policies and programs are needed to ensure that our care economy works for all.
Thank you, Dean Colvin and Wendy Chun-Hoon. I am Kathy Creighton. I'm the director of Cornell's ILR office in Buffalo. I'm really excited to moderate today's panel because the topic is so relevant to so many of us who are personally impacted by the childcare crisis. Childcare workers are almost all women and disproportionately women of color because, as the speakers before us have said, because the wages of childcare workers are so low, many of those workers have left the industry, which is having a tremendous rippling impact across our economy. Without childcare workers, childcare providers can't enroll all the children they have space for. That's causing huge wait lists for childcare, resulting in an inability of parents, mostly women, to return to the workforce. And that's exacerbating our labor shortage in America. We have a really ambitious program today. We're going to hear from folks who are studying and tackling the childcare crisis and from those who are working in the childcare industry. Every speaker we're going to hear from is working on rebuilding childcare in ways that are more just, more equitable, better for children, parents, workers, employers, and society. Let's hear now from Leah Austin. Leah is the executive director for the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment at the Institute for Research on Labor and Employment at UC Berkeley. Leah's center is really at the forefront of doing amazing research and policy work on childcare. Thank you for all your work, Leah. Let's hear from Leah.
Hello, and thank you to the Women's Bureau and Director Chun-Hoon for the opportunity to offer some comments on this very critical topic. In reading the description for this webinar, I was really glad to see that you posed the question, how can we reimagine a childcare system that meets the needs of families while treating childcare workers with dignity? Too often discussions around the workforce are focused on what more training or professional development people think early educators need, rather than on what conditions are needed to ensure that educators have what they need to be effective and for them to have the right to experience dignity, economic and otherwise, in their work. Here at the Center, we're a mission-driven organization grounded in research, policy development, and centering educators' voices. Our center has, since 1999, been dedicated to researching and uplifting what early educators need to do their job well and ensure their own well-being. In other words, to experience dignity. And what we've learned from educators is pretty straightforward. Educators say they need things like access and the conditions to engage in good preparation and ongoing learning, that they need safe, supportive working environments, including paid time, to do all of the things that educators and caregivers do in addition to teaching and working directly with children. Planning, administration, paperwork, all of those things. And they need appropriate compensation, including wages and benefits, so that they can support their families and themselves without worrying about how to pay, basic bills or put food on the table. But as you likely all know too well, that these straightforward needs have not yet translated into effective and equitable policies or fair treatment of this workforce. Instead, what we end up seeing is that childcare businesses, most of which are small and women-owned, are operating on very thin margins. And the slightest drop in enrollment and income really was all it took for many to permanently close or to just hang on by a thread. And the pandemic didn't create these circumstances, but it certainly exacerbated them and has brought childcare to the brink of collapse in this country. We've lost more than 16,000 childcare programs and more than 115,000 jobs in the sector since the onset of COVID-19. Pandemic relief funds have, of course, been incredibly helpful, but they're not going to solve the childcare crisis, and we all know that. Just 4 months into the pandemic, in July of 2020, for example, we did a survey from my center here of providers in California, and we found that 1 in 5 were already behind on their rent or mortgage payment for their business at that time. Most childcare programs, have to rely on what parents can afford to pay in order to fund their programs, and that includes funding wages for their teachers and educators. And so this renders childcare workers among the lowest paid in every state. The median wage today is $13.22 an hour. This translates into 98% of other occupations in this country being paid more than our childcare workers. Poverty rates are double those of other workers and on average 8 times higher than that of K-8 teachers. And then within this, there are racial pay gaps in which we find that Black women in particular are paid less than their peers. And there's pay penalties for those who are working with our youngest children, our infants and toddlers. The younger the pay, the lower the child. That wouldn't make sense. The younger the child, the lower the pay, is a really unfortunate statement. But it plays out all across this country with people who care for infants and toddlers really being on the lowest end of our pay scale. Care and early education, work that is performed almost exclusively by women, which is why we're centering that here today, and often by women of color and immigrant women, has long been devalued in our country. Its origins were built on the backs of Black women who were enslaved and forced to care for white children with priority over their own families. And these roots of oppression run deep into our childcare system today. We see this in the racialized pay gaps, racialized opportunities for better jobs in the sector, and in the way that fixes get applied along the way. We see inequitable distribution of resources, for example. We observe this in things like quality rating systems. And ultimately, our system is organized and designed in a way right now that relies on the exploitation of this workforce, again, mostly women, in order to make childcare available. But that certainly doesn't mean that we can't realize change. And asking how we ensure dignity for early educators and centering them in change is really moving us in the right direction. So I'm so glad this conversation is happening. And I would just suggest some ideas for how we can frame this. I know you'll be talking about this more in the webinar and hearing some ideas and exciting things that are happening in places where movement is afoot. But I would just suggest that we set our sights on early care and education as a public good that is justice driven, that's designed to be accessible and effective for the most under-resourced, that is paid for with public funds and delivered in public, nonprofit, and community providers and programs, that delivers good jobs and good working conditions, and importantly, that we aim for universally free and available, so that parent income, what parents can pay, which we know is too much, that they can't afford the true cost, but that we break that link between what parents can afford and what's available to pay people to do this work. We really have to decouple those things in order to make this system work and to make it equitable. And also to find strategies and resources that facilitate collectivism and power building among educators. Things that can create conditions so that people and groups can organize, that they can exercise collective power and action. And really thinking about what needs to be done and how do we ensure that people have the right to speak up for themselves, that it's safe for them to do so. Most childcare workers are working in small programs. They're very isolated. And when they're already experiencing, economic insecurity because of their low wages, being able to speak up for yourself can be hard. It can be scary. For many, they feel that that's a big risk to their jobs and job security. So really thinking about what has to be in place to ensure people have the right to speak up for themselves and have the right to gather with others and really engage in collective action and collective movements. So thank you again for these few minutes today, and I really look forward to hearing what's next from the Women's Bureau in this work and from this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Leah. We're going to turn now to Boston, Massachusetts, where we're going to hear from Lindsay McCluskey and Darlene Lumbos. They've teamed up to bring an innovative approach to tackling the childcare crisis in Buffalo. Lindsay is the senior strategist at Community Labor United for Care in Boston, and Darlene Lumbos is the executive secretary treasurer of the Greater Boston Labor Council. I really love this synergy of organized labor working with community organizations to make a difference. And thank you for coming. Can you guys tell us about the pilot project that you're working on? And I just want to remind the audience that if you have questions, please pose it to the chat and we'll try to get to it later. Thank you,
Kathy. And thanks so much for having us and highlighting our work as one of the local examples as part of this webinar. So in Boston, we have launched a pilot program that we call the Care That Works pilot program. And the program is really designed to support low-income Black and people of color single moms in particular, from low-income communities in Boston on their pathways into family-sustaining jobs in industries like construction and hospitality. And these represent, good union jobs that have benefits, that have high wages, but there is a persistent challenge on top of all of the ordinary challenges that moms have accessing childcare. These industries have non-traditional hours, so they're operating when most licensed childcare is not available. And so our pilot program has partnered with and is subsidizing licensed family childcare providers who are able to accommodate those non-standard schedules and support moms on their pathways into higher wage work. And we've done this by recruiting a cohort of 11 licensed family childcare providers who are willing to provide care as early as 5 or 5:30 in the morning, which is when moms entering construction need to be able to work. We identify families through our community partners that are part of our coalition, and also through union-affiliated training programs. And we connect them with the family childcare providers that enable them to go to their training program or go to the job site. And we support providers by providing a monthly stipend to compensate them for the sacrifices they're making by doing early morning childcare. And we also promote their businesses to families and try to work to fill their slots and get them up to capacity, especially coming out of the pandemic. And I think for me, the thing that really makes this pilot program work and the thing that's special about it is the amazing and diverse coalition of women that have come together to pull it off. So our program includes community organizations, in particular, one named Brookview House, that's a transitional housing facility for single moms and their children who are trying to lift their families out of homelessness. We're also working with union-affiliated training programs in both the construction and hospitality industries. We are working with the union that represents family childcare providers here in Massachusetts, SEIU Local 509. And then we're also working with unions that are in the construction industry, like the Boston Building Trades unions and several of their affiliates. And this group has really come together that represents, moms that need access to better jobs and are ready to go into training programs. It represents the pipeline and it represents the care that's needed to get there. And I think for me, this is not just a pilot program that we're running because we want to help individual families. It's actually also about a bigger vision. And it's really designed to model our coalition's vision of what a childcare system looks like that actually supports the needs of working class communities. And our partner organizations are really united by a strong vision of a publicly funded childcare system that is shaped to empower those who are worst impacted by unaffordable and inaccessible care and unpaid care labor and underpaid care labor. So we choose to center single moms, and we also choose to center home-based caregivers as two communities of women, many of whom are women of color and immigrant women who lose out under our current system. And by modeling a program that works for these women, we know that we're creating a system that many can benefit from, not just single moms and home-based caregivers. We really think that this rising tide can lift other boats in the community and amongst the workforce. And lastly, I'll just say, the childcare system really must reflect the needs of working class women and families. And we need to keep up the fight for universal childcare, and our coalition, Care That Works Coalition, is a part of that fight. But we also need to build a system that we want from the ground up. And that means, that the shape of universal childcare really matters, and ensuring that those who are most directly directly affected by the inequitable system of today should be shaping the new system that we want to see. And that's really what we're trying to model in this pilot program. Darlene, do you want to add anything that I missed?
You didn't miss anything, but I did want to share that I've just had the privilege of when I was at Community Labor United as a former executive director, starting up this campaign, and then being able to work with Lindsay and all the other coalition partners has been an incredible honor. I did want to just say that actually Secretary Walsh, when he was mayor of the city of Boston, was one of the first believers in this and funded this pilot through the city of Boston, and now has gone on to become the Secretary of USDOL and is a believer of making sure through Wendy Chun-Hoon and all the great work at the Women's Bureau in lifting up these models that are so necessary to create the system that we want to see happen. And mostly what I wanted to contribute was that now that I'm at the Labor Council and we're seeing such an influx of federal dollars, thanks to all of the folks on the national level who have fought diligently and tirelessly for good jobs and pathways into those jobs for women and people of color. We are seeing this influx of money, our once in a generation funding for the kinds of systems that we want to see. And we are well positioned here in Boston and Massachusetts to make sure that the labor movement leads on this, that we are actually working with our governments, our municipal governments, our state governments to realize the vision that national leaders have. And we are ready to make that reality here on the local level. So we're ready and to be positioned to make sure that those dollars and the infrastructure funds go to making sure there are good union jobs with pathways for women and people of color into communities that need it the most. So we really thank you for that opportunity and the opportunity to be here today.
You guys, this is such a great pilot program. I can't wait to see what research, paper comes out of it so we can all read extensively. But what I also think about is it's pretty simple and easy to emulate, which is the whole purpose for this program, or one of the purposes for this program, is to lift up and highlight really great work that's going on around the country. So I applaud you both so much. Stick around because there's other people have questions for you after we hear from some other speakers. So thanks so much. Next, we're going to hear from Kimberly Perry, and Kimberly is the executive director for DC Action. She's in Washington, DC, and they have a great kids-centered mission. So DC Action focuses on equity to break down barriers that stand in the way of children. I've been reading extensively about what District of Columbia is doing to alleviate their childcare crisis, and Kimberly, I'm really looking forward to hear what you have to say about how you all are working on the childcare crisis. So thanks so much for coming. Welcome, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so pleased to be with you guys today. Again, I'm Kim Perry. I feel like the luckiest kid in the land. I lead DC Action for Children. We're located in your nation's capital, and I'm also one of the proud leaders and members of the Under 3 DC Coalition that was formed. I'm going to give you some good news first, and then tell you sort of what our journey has been to get there. Just last year, the Under 3 DC Coalition had a huge victory. We were able to raise more than $75 million in new public revenue to fund our Birth to 3 for All law, and specifically the provision in that law to raise compensation and pay for our early educators, for every teacher and assistant teacher in our district. Give you a little snapshot here. Average pay for our early educators right now averages about $30,000 a year. Some of our lowest paid workers, as you've heard from previous speakers, just this year, by way of a pay supplement, their annual income will go up to $43,000 a year. And eventually, we hope to see them have pay parity with public school teachers here in the District of Columbia. The other thing we've been able to build on after that big victory last year is to continue to fund the health, mental health, and family strengthening services for families that need it the most. If we're talking about equity, to gen equity for workers and for families, we have to be talking about mental health. So now let me tell you a little bit about how we got to this big win that, of course, now we're all focused on implementing with integrity, and again, making sure equity remains the center of this big victory. In the District of Columbia, 21% of kids who are under the age of 5 live in families who are living below the poverty line. And so that just makes it almost virtually impossible to afford quality early education programs. The average cost of infant toddler care here in the district is over $2,000 a month. It's the most expensive, really, across the country in our 50 states. Wages for early educators, as I mentioned before, are about $30,000 a year. So they're at living wages, minimum wage here in the District of Columbia. And so with wages that are so low, it just makes it very hard to attract and retain high quality and qualified workers. And it really does undermine the stability and quality of care. Again, all things you've just heard from other speakers. The other piece that was really missing is that the voices of our early educators were ignored and not really considered in policy discussions. And so there just has been also insufficient support for families with young children trying to figure out how to pay more than $2,000 a month for childcare, which is just second to what they might pay for rent or mortgage every month. So the solution, what I first want to mention is the Birth to Three law really builds on two movements here in the district. Pre-K for all, which was passed in 2008. So we've had pre-K here for more than a decade, and it's very promising. It's paying off. And then we also passed paid family leave here in the district in 2016. So there's been a movement in early education for quite a while in the district. And I want to say through the generous funding of foundations like the Bainham Family Foundation, Alliance for Early Success, and others. So the Birth to Three for All Act was passed in 2018, but without sufficient funding to fully implement it. And that's where the Under 3 DC Coalition comes in. The focus of the statewide coalition, with scores of statewide organizations and community-based organizations, are focused on three areas to fully implement the law. Ensuring that no family pays more than 10% of their income on childcare. Second, ensuring that early educators are paid on par with our public school teachers, as I mentioned before. And three, giving families and educators access to proven services, such as home visiting, family strengthening services, and mental health support. I'd now like to share a little bit of our fight and how we're structured and how this movement has been fueled. First of all, because this issue impacts women of color like nobody else, this coalition is led by women of color. We developed a set of equity values that we put to work every day, one of which is that those closest to the pain shall lead. So lawmaker meetings are all done by coalition members, early educators. Their voices, their stories, their experiences guide this narrative, shape the narrative, and it comes directly from them. We also built and funded an advocacy infrastructure, again, with long-term funding partners like the Bainham Family Foundation and the Alliance for Early Success. We shifted the narrative through voter polling, influential op-eds, shaping media articles, policymaker town halls, not town halls that policymakers convene. We said, why do we have to come to you? You should come to us, the community. And so our town halls are ones in which we invite policymakers to attend, to hear, and listen to our early educators, to our parents, and to those who are serving our young people across the district. We do teach-ins about childcare so people understand what families are really grappling with. Digital organizing, why not go where people are? And in the midst of a pandemic, people are online. We leveraged debates of the day, like the pandemic, unfortunately, like the racial reckoning and uprising that happened in our country in 2020. All of these issues affect childcare and the struggles that families are experiencing, and we take every opportunity to make sure people see the connection and links between those issues and the importance of childcare, infrastructure, and all of the issues that Congress and any state legislature is debating on a daily basis. We also partnered with the business community, labor community, and housing groups. If our families don't have affordable and safe housing, what are we doing? So they have to be a partner. And our housing groups were a key partner in the tax increase that we did to fund the pay increases for early educators. And then finally, we showed up to make our case at every opportunity to lawmakers. We never gave them an out. We never backed down. Again, we always showed up. One of my favorite moments is one of our lawmakers saying to me, "My God, Kim Perry, everywhere I go, someone's asking me about childcare." That's the way it should be. That's how urgent this is. And that's how important it is for us to make change in this sector. So you might ask, what's next? We're implementing pay supplements. Our task force has created a pay scale, but next is benefits for our teachers and assistant teachers in addition to pay. We're surprised at how many early educators are using public benefit programs, and that's got to change, and we can do better. And so that's what we'll be focused on next. Also, program directors and program administrators, those who lead and own our family home-based care, they deserve raises too. And so that is coming next for us. And then finally, an expansion of additional mental health supports. You cannot serve or meet the needs of families of color without recognizing the historical trauma and the very current trauma that families are living with every single day. So mental health, and family strengthening is baked into this policy and this law, and it's baked into the way we go about raising funds and leveraging public financing to meet the requirements of the law. So I'm going to stop there. I know there are a few questions. Again, really pleased to be with you all today. Thanks for the opportunity for us to share what our movement has been up to, these big wins we're in the midst of, but more importantly, the great obligation we have to ensure that it's implemented again with integrity and continued equity at the core.
Kim, that is really, really inspirational. And you just laid out like a perfect roadmap for community organizing and all the ways that you've so successfully done that. Bravo for such a successful, well-earned campaign. And also like hearing from the Boston folks, really getting your allies and community together and putting the community voice first seems to be a key component here. So we're going to be taking questions later. There are questions for you in the chat that I've received, but we're going to hold that for now. And we're going to go to listen to Marcia. Marcia St. Hilaire Finn is a childcare provider. She's executive director of Bright Start Early Care Bilingual Center. And Marcia is going to tell us about the challenges of childcare. She's going to talk about childcare infrastructure, which is so just as important as a road that gets you to work. Before you can get on the road that gets you to work, you need to have someone to take care of your children in a competent and qualified way. So let's hear from Marcia.
Hi, I'm Marcia St. Hilaire, the founder and president of Bright Start Early Care and Preschool in Northwest Washington, D.C., Ward 4. We were established in 2002 with 5 children and will have the capacity to serve 225 children with 45 employees by the end of 2022. I advocate for equity, social benefits, and pay for early childhood teachers and leaders. The current childcare landscape and crisis from my lens is dire and creates a negative effect on the industry. Firstly, the cost for providing quality childcare is exorbitant, pricing families out of the market, creating scarcity, and forcing mothers out of the job market. Secondly, finding qualified employees is another factor, since the pay required for highly qualified teachers is beyond the reach of small businesses like ours. Some of the gaps in childcare are especially among low-income families, finding access to quality care because of price and scarcity. It is also critical to understand how to adequately support and pay workers so that care quality improves without sacrificing affordability. In addition to the traditional factors used to assess childcare, such as cost, quality, and accessibility, we should also consider concepts of job quality and the childcare role as a work support for families. As to the needs of workers, they want social benefits and their mental health addressed. We as a company have engaged in one-on-one to understand our workers' needs and assist them with mindset shift and the resources to achieve their dreams. Workers want to know that you care about their needs as much as they care for the children they are trusted to care. As a childcare owner, I've known this crisis intimately for many years, not only as a small business owner with employees myself, but also in talking to our parents about how hard it is to balance the accessibility and affordability of childcare, and also needing to take time off to heal or care for elderly parents without losing their paychecks. Small businesses like mine have been calling for local and federal investments for years. Recently, organizations representing thousands of small businesses sent a letter to Congress calling for urgent action on paid leave and investments in our care economy. Small businesses can't provide these on our own. With the private insurance market, we've been priced out. We need bold federal investment to level the playing field. In the same way I need my roads to get to work, my employees and I need a care infrastructure in place with time to heal for employees when they need it, and affordable and accessible childcare. We can't build back better if we don't address those long-standing gaps that have been holding our economy back, particularly for Black women like myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcia. Marcia has been working right in this childcare crisis, and we applaud you, Marcia. We're going to pivot now, and our next set of speakers are going to reflect on the childcare crisis. First, join me in welcoming Martine Sadarangi Gordon, who is Senior Advisor for Early Childhood Development at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Martine, I'm so happy you can join us today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. And I know that I'm understudying for our Deputy Assistant Secretary for Early Childhood Development, who I work with closely, who is just feeling a little under the weather today. So I'm happy to make the change last minute and be here with you all.
Yeah, that was really great of you. And thanks for being flexible.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering if you could talk to our audience about what the main priorities are for the Biden-Harris administration when it comes to tackling the barriers in the childcare workforce.
Absolutely. Our team actually works closely with the White House on this. The Biden-Harris administration is definitely committed to building an early care and education system that works for all families. And today's conversation is really critical for us all to partner on being able to do that. I think what we've heard throughout the day and what we know to be true is that as a country, we need to address the current early childhood workforce shortage. And to do that, we need to invest in early educators. We know that addressing this workforce crisis will require investments in both wages and benefits for early educators, as well as access to degrees and credentials to strengthen the pipeline. And as others have discussed today, and as we know, the early education workforce has been historically undercompensated. We know that there are also racial pay gaps within the sector as well, and that low wages have impeded the field by failing to match advancements in competencies and credentials with comparable increases in pay. And at the same time, the opportunity for credential and degree attainment is also not equitably available to all early educators. We know there are definitely layers to the equity challenges here. So the administration knows that the success of early career education programs depends on programs' ability to recruit, develop, retain high qualified, competent, experienced education staff who have diverse backgrounds that reflect the cultures and languages of children and families in the communities where they're located. And Kathy, I think you're also going to ask me about what we're doing about this. So I'm happy to address that.
Thanks for anticipating my question, and please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot. I would be remiss to ignore that last spring, our office, the Office of Early Child Development at the Administration of Children and Families within the Department of Health and Human Services, released the American Rescue Plan Act funds. That was resources for states, for Head Start programs and other early childhood education programs to invest in recruiting, supporting, and retaining staff. By way of childcare, the American Rescue Plan included the single largest investment in childcare that our country has seen. And these funds are helping. They continue to help hundreds of thousands of early educators and family childcare providers, mostly small businesses, stay open or reopen by making rent payments, mortgage payments, helping with utility and insurance bills, a lot of the things that we've talked about already today that are needed, maintaining or improving facilities, paying off debts incurred during the pandemic. We know the funds are supporting providers to enable safe and healthy learning environments for more than 5 million children across the country. And they're keeping childcare workers, as we've mentioned, disproportionately women of color and immigrants, on the payroll. Programs have been able to rehire those who have been laid off. They've been able to recruit new workers. They've been able to increase the pay and benefits of childcare workers and family childcare providers. So in addition to the funds being released, we also published guidance as we were releasing the funds, and have continued to encourage CCDF administrators and Head Start program operators across the country to use the ARP funds to increase payments and compensation and benefits for the early education workforce, and to invest in the workforce that, as we know, has been long undervalued and underpaid. These funds do expire at the end of fiscal year 2023. So I want to stress that without additional financial support, many early education programs could be forced to limit service or close. And this is why we need sustained investment. I am really impressed when I see many of the incredibly innovative and strategic ways that states and local programs are using ARP dollars, and sometimes pairing them with local dollars to recruit and retain a strong and stable workforce right now, and to build the systemic improvements to creating a pipeline for this field. And when in addition to the actual payments, we also highlighted some of these innovative strategies on a new workforce webpage on the Office of Early Childhood Development's site that include strategies to address the shortage. And we've also been convening regional meetings to discuss these strategies and lift up innovative approaches like some that you're hearing about today, including improving childcare subsidy payment rates, increasing staff wages, providing one-time bonuses or incentives, providing benefits for workers, funding scholarships and time off for training or enrollment in educational coursework, expanding shared service models, substitute pools, family childcare networks, providing staff wellness supports, such as guaranteed breaks during the workday, things that other industries take for granted, but not all early educators have available to them, including mentoring and coaching and mental health consultation. So in addition to all of this, we've been doing as much creatively as we can to take action regardless of the status of additional legislation, which I think we know a lot of our work and the federal level tends to be dependent on. But I want to give some examples of things that we've been doing regardless. We're not waiting around. So in November, we partnered with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to help early child education workers access more affordable healthcare coverage. We're also excited about the strides that states are making on that issue in particular, such as Washington State's use of ARP and other COVID relief funds to make health insurance premiums free for all their staff in licensed childcare across the state. So just wanted to make a mention of that practice as well. Another example of some creative things we're doing in March, we just held a joint webinar with our partners at the Department of Education on public service loan forgiveness for the early education workforce. We want this workforce to have the opportunity to have their critical service to our families and the economy recognized. And the public service loan forgiveness benefit is offered temporarily this year by the Department of Education. The webinar we hosted was recorded, and you can actually view it and share it on the Administration for Children and Families YouTube page. Please share it with early educators. You know, they can apply by October 31st, so a little plug there. And I really want to thank all of you again for allowing me this time to come and talk a little bit about our work and share in the innovative practices that you've all been involved in as well. I see there's a question in the chat. Kathy, should I answer that?
I think we're holding questions until the end. But I just want to say on a personal note, we worked with our Erie County legislators and government and our state legislators to do a childcare study. And we relied a lot upon what I learned was that money that came from the federal government was critical in keeping, even though things are dire, keeping things somewhat afloat. So thank you for your work in the administration. And we'll get back to you. There are several questions.
I know there are questions, Kathy. I am actually going to have to drop. I'm sorry. I know this was, I'm just studying, but it was a little bit of a last minute thing. I'll go ahead and send a note to try to answer the question in the chat though.
Which one? Do you want to answer about the tracking the outcomes of the ARP funds or which
the
question?
one I'm seeing is sort of how we're partnering with the Department of Labor and Department of Education.
Why don't you go ahead and take a couple minutes to answer that? Yeah.
Yeah, I just it's a very big question. I just want to reiterate quickly that we are very good partners with Department of Labor and Department of Ed, and really across the agencies over at HHS. And at the leadership level, at the staff level, where there's multiple touch points and multiple areas of collaboration. And we're trying to align our sort of our data impact collection just to be able to make sure that we can share that publicly. A lot of times we have data internally and maybe it doesn't necessarily get out there. And so I know that that's not giving you a lot of detail, but just want to reinforce that there is a lot of really wonderful collaboration happening. Wendy, who you heard from earlier, and our colleagues at the Department of Education as well, where we are definitely a team.
That's great. That's great. I'm really glad to hear of all the work that you're doing. I feel like we could have you on for a full 2 hours to answer questions from what people are sending in. So thank you so much for pinch hitting and coming in today. And thank you for all your work.
Thank you as well. Thank you all for highlighting this very critical issue, and have a good one.
All right. We're going to turn now to the great state of Ohio. And we're going to hear from Erica Crawley. She's a commissioner in Franklin County. I believe that encompasses the state capital, Columbus, Ohio. Is that correct? And Commissioner Crawley you all have been doing amazing work on a program called Franklin County Rise, which provides enormous resources to child care providers. And so my question to you is, from the work that we've done in our office in Buffalo, we know that county government is really on the front lines of childcare. And so your childcare initiative is really important. So are you able to articulate, how are you able to articulate the need and the opportunity around this childcare issue and mobilize support to get such significant funding? So thank you for answering that question and sharing with us, Commissioner.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kathy, and everyone that's here today for having me and allowing me to speak about Franklin County Rise. It is a historic investment from a local municipality. I don't know that there's another local, we've been doing our research across the country, that has invested more than $23 million of ARPA funds to childcare. And so we're pretty proud about that. But it was this has been in the making, and I think just the ARPA funding has provided access to be able to move forward on some of the things that we already knew was a challenge. And so I will go back a little to 2017 and 2018 and try to link our poverty blueprint to the Franklin County Rise initiative. So in 2017 and 2018 at the time, my colleagues and the former commissioner who I replaced held more than 100 community conversations about poverty and how one could move themselves up an economic mobility ladder. And one of the outcomes that came from that was childcare was a barrier, whether it was affordability or not having a program close to where a family lived. And so in order to move up the economic mobility ladder, that needed to be addressed. So out of the 100 plus conversations for our poverty blueprint came 113 recommendations. And then we created an innovation center where innovative ideas will go to be developed and implemented. But everything that we do at the county, from approving resolutions to initiatives, ties back to our Rise Together blueprint, poverty blueprint. And so in Ohio, we already had an attack on childcare, in particular when it came up to the Step Up to Quality rating scale. We had a mandate that was going into effect in 2020, and we knew that Franklin County, being the largest county, Columbus is the seat of government here. Columbus is our largest city, but out of 30 plus cities. And so Franklin County, out of 88 counties, was behind every other county, getting our child care centers and home-based providers at least 1-star rated. And we knew that we were going to end up losing a lot of programs. And so the county had invested $4 million of GF dollars to provide training and technical assistance to get our providers up to speed so they can meet that mandate. While I was in the legislature, because I came from the legislature, I represented East and Southeast Franklin County all the way up until July of last year. I was ranking member on finance. And so some of my former colleagues were trying to get rid of Step Up to Quality altogether, get rid of our quality rating scale, also not increase eligibility for publicly funded childcare. At the time, it was 130% FPL. And we were trying to get it to at least 200%. Where we landed, and the operating budget was around 142% federal poverty limit, and then 150 for those who had developmental disabilities. And we knew that that wasn't, good enough. It didn't meet the needs of families. After we passed the state operating budget, I ended up taking an appointment at the county, coming down to the county, and we held, one of the first things that we did, we held a public forum to hear from the community about how we should be spending these ARPA dollars that we had. A lot of people wanted to know what were we doing. They felt like we were sitting on the dollars and not moving them, but we were trying to be strategic and really meet the needs of the community. And so what happened through the public hearing is a number of childcare providers came and testified and said, this is what we need. The bottom is falling out of this industry. It would be great if you could use these dollars in this way. And there was a child care support team put together by our resource and referral agency, Action for Children, that had a number of stakeholders come together and look at how we could address all of the needs that providers and educators and parents needed. And so they put together some recommendations, and that's how you get Franklin County Rise. After hearing from our community, my work prior to being elected has been in the nonprofit sector, advocating on behalf of children and families. And so something that was near and dear to my heart, and I decided that I wanted to take this on, coming from the legislature and now at the local level. And I have really two great commissioners that I work with who were like, okay with me leading the charge on this because it was very passionate for me. And so we see childcare as a public good. And so since we at the end of the day, $258 million of ARPA funds, we decided that right now we were going to use $23 million of that in a number of different ways. And so the ARPA funding is a foundation to Franklin County Rise. Investing in childcare was a clear opportunity for this funding because we know that we have a serious learning and developmental setbacks during the pandemic. Only 40% of our Franklin County children are ready for kindergarten. And it helps early child care providers, which are small businesses, keep from closing. During the pandemic, we have had 173 centers close, with 50% currently struggling and saying that they don't know that they will be able to meet their obligations to keep their doors open over the next 3 months. And so RISE helps child care providers and educators who, as you already heard, are disproportionately women and women of color who work for low wages while facing rising housing costs. And it addresses the inequities that have been exacerbated by the pandemic, both for children and workers. When it comes to what we decided to do and why it's such a significant investment, the city of Columbus had already made their announcement where they were using $3.5 million of ARPA funds for signing bonuses and some scholarships, and $2.5 million of that went to scholarships. We decided that we were going to put $11.4 million in scholarships for those families who hit the benefits cliff. So here, as I said, in the state operating budget, we increased eligibility from 130% to 142%. But for families who make too much to qualify for publicly funded childcare, but don't make enough to keep a roof over their head, water running, lights on, and pay for childcare, we wanted to help those who hit that benefits cliff. So families can get up to $10,000 to help set aside childcare costs, and they would apply for those funds through their childcare provider. So in this year, there's 750 scholarships available for families who hit that benefits cliff, and next year it's 500. The other thing that came out of the recommendations, not the recommendations from the task force, but just hearing childcare providers and families who wanted to enter into the workforce, we needed incentives for childcare providers to expand their business model and be open during those non-traditional hours, as you heard earlier. So we are incentivizing childcare providers to be open between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Or 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And so for those who would be open during those times, you could receive $1,000 for those non-traditional hours, or $1,250 for a center and $1,000 for a home base. There are 6 incentives for providers, so that's one of them. The other one is for a provider that decided to enter into a new publicly funded childcare agreement. So a center that doesn't already take PFCC, if they are willing to sign up into a new agreement, you can get $1,000 to support low-income families. If you maintained a PFCC agreement during the pandemic and you continue to, $1,000 is available. Also, if you have opened and you are not on a quality rating scale, you don't have 1 star, but you work towards it, you can get a one-time payment of $2,500 for a center and $1,000 for a family child care center. If you maintain your step up to quality rating during this time, $2,500 is available for centers and $1,000 for home-based. And then the other one is if you increase your quality rating scale to a 3, 4, or 5, you can get a one-time payment of $10,000. And so you can see that childcare providers could qualify for more than one incentive. And then the other thing that we wanted to do, so we have scholarships for families who hit the benefits cliff. We have 6 incentive awards for childcare providers, but how could we help teachers? And we know that wages are low. Here in Ohio, for an assistant teacher, the average wage is $11.39. For a lead teacher, is around $12.22. And the first thing we looked at is how can we subsidize wages? And it was just unsustainable. Somewhere around $52 million a year is what the investment would be needed to continue that. And we just did not have that. So we were like, what else can we do that was not in the recommendations from the support team? And we didn't hear from the families or from educators. It was, written utility assistance that was made available from the emergency rental assistance dollars from the federal government. So teachers can get up to $3,000 to offset costs for written utility assistance. And we set aside $500,000 for that initiative. So, we understand that this is a public good, that we have to invest in our children now, tomorrow, and in the future. And I just want to add, before I just wrap up and send it back to Kathy, how this plays with our workforce development programs. We are very well known for our Building Futures, Driving Futures, and Roads to Work. Those are 3 workforce development programs that are predominantly African American. We have a cohort today of Building Futures, of all women cohort, working with our labor partners to get people who are low income or no income going right directly into the middle class. We provide rent and utility assistance for them. We have set aside scholarships for those families where childcare is a barrier. And we want families to take advantage of that because we don't want childcare to continue to be a barrier to go to work. And so we have scholarships set aside for those people who are in our workforce development programs. Driving Futures is to get your CDL, and it's working with the Teamsters. Roads to Work is the same thing. We have Tech Women of Color who are eligible for scholarships, and Women at Work. So we have a number of workforce development programs that we're pairing with Franklin County RISE to be able to eliminate the inequities that we see in the childcare industry.
Wow, it's really amazing amount that you've done. And there's so many themes that keep coming around, like this community building with the community is really important. And that probably comes from your community work that you did in the not-for-profit sector. And then this heavy reliance upon the federal government, ARPA funds. So thank you for sharing with us what you're doing, Commissioner, there in Ohio. And there are questions. I hope you can stick around. But next, we're going to hear from Allison Julian. Allison is with We Dream in Black. She's the organizing director for the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Allison, hello.
Hello, Kathy. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. So we're going to talk about the nanny industry. So much of the nanny industry takes place behind closed doors. How do you do outreach to shine a light on that industry and what's happening in the nanny industry, maybe more broadly?
Great. Thank you so much for that question, Kathy. And most of our outreach in the ways are generally done in public. It's done on public transportation, in bus stations or train stations, in parks or playgrounds, libraries, bookstores, anywhere in the street, and even social media. Pretty much anywhere where nannies gather is an opportunity for us to reach the sector of workers. And once we reach our nannies who oftentimes work in isolation and in individual homes across the country, we're able to share with them about the work we're doing at the National Domestic Workers Alliance, organizing domestic workers, where we have in-person gatherings or meetings or trainings. And due to the pandemic, a lot of our work has been done virtually.
It's really great. So you know that historically domestic workers, they were excluded from the right to organize under the National Labor Relations Act as a legacy of slavery. Are you seeking to organize nannies in some sort of traditional style? This ties in with a question, through apprenticeships, or how are you tackling this issue?
Wow, as you know, domestic workers, and when we talk about domestic workers, they're nannies, house cleaners, and care providers of the elderly or disabled. And in this area, I'll talk about nannies. We are not included in the formal care sector. So this is really informal care. And the way that we see this is historically, domestic workers have been excluded from labor laws. And we want to ensure that these workers who have been devalued because the work is racialized and it's gendered. It's mainly work that's done by Black and Brown women and is oftentimes work that's not recognized or seen as real work. And how we do this is really thinking through how are the skills. We know that the skills, when we think of childcare and the skills in the informal sector and the way that it's seen, is oftentimes not seen as skilled labor. And we challenge those narratives to say that childcare is highly skilled work. And in the informal sector in particular, these workers are generally poorly compensated, not respected, not recognized for their knowledge or their expertise and the professionalism in child care. And we've been partnering with the Cornell Worker Institute to ensure that workers are developing skills, and we're raising the standards in the industry as a way of critical intervention and credentialing of mainly low wage immigrant workers who are doing this work so that we can continue to gain recognition and respect as childcare professionals. And we're doing that through a program called the Re-Rise Nanny Training Program, which includes education on know your rights and negotiation. This program seeks to empower nannies while integrating their skills, their knowledge, and providing certification for them to better be able to negotiate for themselves in the workplace. And the training is also set to seek that we know that training and workforce development alone is not enough. And there's a need for an investment in childcare to ensure that families and many of our members who are mainly single women and mothers who are working across the childcare sector have access to higher and dignified wages, making sure that jobs are good jobs, and ensuring workers are paid as professionals in their industry. And another thing that I want to say here, like briefly, is although nannies are not a part of the public care system, there's the need to invest in care and recognize that the care infrastructure, which impacts all of us, and we hope to reimagine a care system where care providers are uniting both in the formal and the informal sectors. And within the National Domestic Workers Alliance, we're currently pushing for our federal Bill of Rights for domestic workers and for inclusion in HCBS and the care agenda in budget reconciliation to ensure that a key part of our transforming the informal care sector is in recognizing that this work is essential and that the workforce is essential, and there really needs to be an investment in care work.
Right. So much of the pandemic and this childcare crisis did, everybody now knows if you have a child and you're on a waiting list to maybe get some care in 2024, realizes that something has gone awry. Thank you so much for your work in shining a light on workers who work in the dark and are not seen and are therefore subject to massive exploitation. So it's really important work, and thank you very much for coming and sharing your time with us. We're going to turn to Julie Cashin. Julie, there you are. Julie is a senior fellow and director for women's economic justice at the Century Foundation. I want Julie to tell you what she does, what her goal is for her career. When she told me, I got kind of goosebumps because it's such a simple but powerful statement. So why don't you say that, Julie?
Yeah, thank you so much. My career has really been about making sure that people, and especially women, have the ability to manage fulfilling work and home lives. and to use public policy as the tool to support that.
That's really so simple and so profound. And you sum it up so well. So you have spent your life working around policies involving women. And in the childcare area, after all your study, and this is just a small question, what do you see as the ultimate solution? Like, what are the ultimate models that you're seeing that could save us from ourselves, that would be the best model for birth through until age 5?
Just a small question, as you said.
Just a small question.
I think, Leah Austin and Commissioner Crawley both said this really well, which is that we need to treat childcare and early education as the public good that they are. We've been hearing, and probably a lot of folks participating have personally experienced just how out of reach childcare prices are for families across the country. It can be more than college tuition, rent, or mortgage payments. And the costs come at a time when often parents are starting out their careers, so they don't have this built up savings to help. And that's only if they can afford. That they can't afford it, and that's only if they can find childcare, right? So finding affordable childcare is even more challenging. Finding any childcare can be challenging, right? Before the pandemic, it was already hard. There were more than half of American families lived in childcare deserts where their neighborhoods just didn't have enough childcare spots. And we've heard over and over today that the early educators who provide this care are completely underpaid for their valuable and complex work. And so we know there's this gap, right, between what parents pay and what early educators are paid. And that's the product of a broken market. It can't be solved by itself. So the federal government must step in with the sustainable long-term investments needed. And that's why it's a public good. And we saw with the stories from Commissioner Crawley that when you engage stakeholders and when you bring, you center the people who are most impacted, you can actually develop a plan for what you would do with that funding when you have it. And then once they had the funding to move forward, they were able to really reach more families, pay higher wages, and improve the system. Same thing with the amazing advocacy work in DC that we heard about, that they're able to, put in the funds needed to raise wages for early educators. And they recognize that that's only one step, that it needs to also be affordable, that it needs to also invest in mental health and high quality care. And so I think, it's number one is that the federal government has a really important role to play to make it a public good, so that we're not pitting parents and providers against each other, because that just doesn't make any sense. And COVID just made it all so much more challenging. So, now is the time that we see how important it is, and it's time to move forward.
Great. That is such a good summation. And so you think that this is a model that we need the federal government to step in and do something about. I'm not going to ask you the question of whether you think the federal government will step in. What I would love to do now is bring back all of our panel members to kind of go through some Q&A. We'd hope to have a full half hour, but we don't have a full half hour. So the first question is to Darlene and Lindsay. It's a question from someone who says that he or she is with a local workforce development board, and childcare is a challenge for many of our participants and employers. What funding sources are you using for the childcare subsidies, and what's the sustainability plan to continue to pay for the subsidies? I see that question, that comes to mind. Many of you are using these ARPA monies, but what happens when that dries up?
Yeah, so we are, I'll just give a summary of where the funding comes from currently, and then you can talk about the sustainability plan. So currently the funding for our pilot program comes from the city of Boston. It was actually negotiated into 2 different project labor agreements for construction jobs in Boston. And we have some funding from private foundations, and then we also have funding directly from some unions to support this work.
And for the pilot, we think that that's really key to be able to have all the stakeholders invest in a program like this to show that it can work. But as I mentioned earlier on, that there is some incredible funding coming from the federal government in infrastructure funds and also competitive grants. So we are well positioned to work with our local governments, local municipalities to make sure that they're using that funding to make sure that the systems that we are building with these new infrastructure dollars are the ones we want to see in the future. So we are really looking towards this influx of infrastructure funds to really make sure that it becomes the building blocks to make this pilot, grow, expand, and become a building block to that universal childcare system we all want to see.
Right, that seems to be a common theme here. There's another question for Darlene and Lindsay. Can women who provide unlicensed home-based care, such as in many immigrant communities, are they eligible for your pilot program?
Yeah, I was excited to see that question. So the answer is not quite yet, but we want to get there. So currently we're just working with family childcare providers, although one of our partner organizations, shout out to New England United for Justice, has taken on some really exciting work to organize a network of family, friend, and neighbor caregivers in the community. And we hope to be able to incorporate them into the pilot over time, because we know how important family, friend, and neighbor caregivers are.
Very, very important, especially for essential workers who work irregular hours too. Yeah.
Yes.
Kim, can you talk about how you are considering benefit cliffs with your work addressing and increasing pay for ECE workers?
I can. The state is still working through how the pay supplements will be administered this year. But the benefits cliff is a real concern for us at the coalition level. Now our lawmakers are very attuned to it, are trying to problem solve through some legislative solutions, but still more to come on that. I'll also mention our Director of Early Childhood, Rakaya Ambar Shaheen, always says this so eloquently. This too is a national issue. There are so many states working on pay supplements, and very often the benefits cliff is a real concern, right? And has unintended consequences. So it's also something we've been raising in our national partnerships and networks with hopes for a resolve for all of us.
Commissioner Crowley, I think you talked about benefit cliffs too. Do you want to chime in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said, we have been struggling with the state to increase eligibility with the federal poverty level. Currently, it's at 142%. And that here only helps those who make under $25,000 a year. And so for those who make too much to qualify for publicly funded childcare, but again, don't make enough to really make sure all of their, that they see more month than money and have to make some very hard decisions. We don't want families to do that. So we are supporting families between 142% to 300%.
That's great. In New York, we just moved to 300%. And that took a lot of work. We were trying to get to universal, but we didn't quite get there. There is a question on what national groups are you working with on this issue?
I can just answer. So I'm part of NACO, the National Association for Counties. So a few months ago, we had our legislative conference in DC. I sponsored a resolution that was voted on unanimously from commissioners of all across the country, asking for significant investment from the federal government, moving forward. And I continue to advocate at the state level. We have $499 million of discretionary funding earmarked for childcare that's supposed to be a pass through, and they're not passing it through. So working with NACO, working with some other advocacy groups. Here we have the Ohio Organizing Collaborative that have worked with other cities in Ohio to get close to universal, and they partnered with national organizations. So we have a number of allies in this space.
I just went and spoke about childcare to our New York State Association of Counties, and the president of the National Association was there. And so, it's county government's generally conservative, but everybody's on board for helping childcare due to this crisis. Does anyone else want to talk about national organizations that are working on this besides you all? Okay. There's a question about whether and this might be for DC Rise, how are recipients paid their support services, stipends, or maybe for a number of you, and are those funds taxed or not taxed?
Well, I can answer for Franklin County Rise. Recipients receive support services through the child care provider. So no income or no dollars are handed directly to the families, so they don't have to claim that as income. They have to apply through their child care provider. So if it's for the scholarships, the provider does it on the family's behalf. Obviously, the child care centers can ask for the incentives themselves. But then for the emergency rental assistance for teachers, that goes through our resource and referral agency, Action for Children. And so they are the administrator, and they work with the landlords to pay those outstanding fees.
Great. Kim, do you know in DC if that money is going to be taxed?
The state agency is still working through the administration of the funds, so I can't give that answer right now. We're just a little early in that process, but we'll be sure to update you all once it rolls out.
All right, I'm curious to hear that. The tax man usually gets his money. Commissioner Crawley or any of the other speakers, how are you working with the business community on these childcare issues?
So for us, here we have the Columbus Partnership, which most of the large corporations are, part of that membership, and then also with our local chambers. I would like to say that we are hand in hand in this, and they are matching our investment, but they're not. And so that's an opportunity for us to continue to collaborate, and we are in some different ways, but trying to help the business community who is a little bit more present now than they've ever been due to their own bottom line being impacted by a lack of employees. And so we are trying to support the workforce behind the workforce, and that businesses, if they don't have employees to help run their corporation or their business, especially small businesses, then what are we even doing here? And so they benefit just as much as the families and the child care providers by making sure we remove this barrier for child care and making sure that we get families, especially women and women of color, back into the workforce.
Right. Our Erie County Chamber of Commerce put as number 3 in its priority list childcare this year because of the crisis of not having people to work. All right, a question.
Can I just add one thought? The Century Foundation with Center for Economic Policy Research did a study to show what the savings would be if the reconciliation proposal for childcare nationally went into effect, and found that $60 billion in reduced business disruptions would go back to local economies. And that's not all of the additional economic activity you would see, because there's additional funding in parental earnings raises, as well as growing the childcare sector. So this public good that we're talking about has major economic implications for states. I also just wanted to highlight that at 2:30 today, the Senate Banking Committee is having a hearing where one of the witnesses testifying is from Small Business for America's Future, talking about how important this is for small businesses' future in terms of childcare. So it is definitely something resonating with businesses across the country.
It's really fascinating that we talked about, we used to talk about early childcare with regard to the children. We haven't, first, and then the workers, and now we're bringing in the business community. So we're making progress. Did you want to add something? I interrupted somebody.
I was just going to say, because our pilot is really connected to the building construction trades industry, and it's been incredible to have the union partners, the signatories, and in particular 2 project labor agreements that included funding for both pre-apprenticeship programs and for the Care That Works pilot program. So in the construction industry anyway, there is a commitment for women and people of color into those pipelines, into the work, and through the unionized apprenticeship program. So we've been able to include them as part of private industry in the funding of our pilot program.
That's great. All right, one final question. It's a question for any of the speakers who are familiar with the registered apprenticeship model for training and upskilling. What pros and cons do you see using a registered apprenticeship in the early childhood field?
Well, since I'm the represent the Labor Council, I think my big dream is for every worker, every sector to have an apprenticeship program, because I believe that those pipelines into unionized jobs are so key to making sure that our communities get what they need, and make sure that the pipelines of women and people of color into this work is something that the labor movement takes the leadership on. So I'm a big fan of it, but I also know we have a lot of work to do. So there aren't apprenticeship programs that I know, at least here in Boston and Massachusetts, that have that in early childhood ed. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that in every sector and industry as far as the labor movement goes.
And Allison, your program is sort of like an apprenticeship program in a sense, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Just offering this program for domestic workers across, so far it's been across New York City, but we're definitely looking to extend this to other domestic workers as well.
That's really great. So we're bringing in Patricia to give us some closing remarks, tell us who she is, and say goodbye. I just want to say, like, you guys are really great, all the work that you're doing across the country. So we covered California to Boston and DC and Buffalo and Ohio. So thank you so much for all your work. Here we go. Patricia.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patricia Campos Medina, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Worker Institute at the School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell University. Since 1940, the ILR School has worked with policymakers, business and labor leaders, workers' justice organizations, non-for-profits, and community groups to improve the lives of workers. As the preeminent educational institution in the world of work, focused on employment and labor relations, we are dedicated to generating and disseminating knowledge that improves the lives of workers, transforms the future of work, and advances collective bargaining rights. Centered on our mission, our work at the Worker Institute is centered to address one critical theme: inequality in work. We believe that inequality is a major economic challenge of our time, made worse by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on essential workers and communities of color. That is why we are delighted with our partnership with the Women's Bureau of the United States Department of Labor to advance this critical discussion on how policymakers, practitioners, academics can work together to put equity in focus. As the federal government engages in an unprecedented level of economic investment to make work better, we must also make a commitment to focus on equity, and equity for women, and equity for all workers who need a real shot at improving their economic prospects. We want to thank all of our speakers today for outlining the steps needed to advance a federal job policy that creates economic recovery for women and women of color. We estimate that the pandemic has set back women's economic advancement for at least 3 decades. We know what women do, that women do most of the needed work that helps all other work be successful in our economy. They take care of our children, of our elderly, and all of those who need assistance in our care economy. Yet many women themselves do not earn enough to take care of themselves and their essential needs, or to provide a life of dignity for the children. We know what it takes to value women's work. It takes love. It takes persistence. It takes policy innovation based on sound research analysis of what works, what can be improved, and what should be replicated and amplified. We learned today from Leah Austin that racial pay gaps are holding back Latina, immigrant, and Black women from having a life of dignity. And as they continue to work at the lowest rate of the pay scale, taking care of our loved ones. In order to improve their economic conditions, early education and childcare must become a public good, something that elected officials and our elected office holders invest as a priority. We learned from our presenters in Boston, Massachusetts, Lindsay and Darlene, with Care That Works, about their pilot program that focuses on supporting low-income workers who are going in themselves trying to improve their their economic outcomes by engaging in pathway jobs to the construction and the hospitality industry. In order for them to be able to afford childcare, to get their skills that they need to be successful on their jobs, they need affordable childcare. So they are right there at the intersection of affordability so that those workers themselves can actually improve their earning potential. We learned from Kimberly Perry at DC Action how they are working to achieve pay equity and how to supporting mental health as a cornerstone for public investment in childcare jobs for working families is essential in making a difference in outcomes for these families. We learned from Alice and Julian how crucial it is to address the rise of nannies in the informal sector, of house cleaners, of home care workers, because if we don't address the rise, we will not improve their outcomes as well. So investment in the formal childcare sector must be accompanied by policies that protect the rights of workers in the informal sector. And we learned from Julie Cashin from the Century Foundation, and she made an argument on how childcare must become a public good, one that needs public investment, with equity outcomes at the cornerstone of how we develop implementation for those programs. We have a unique difference in people's lives. We can make childcare jobs good jobs with unions, with dignity and good wages and benefits. All work has value and all work should be dignified because it produces value in our economy. Therefore, we need to invest in this work so that we can allow women to have a life of dignity. We thank you all for joining this discussion today, and we look forward to continue this equity and focus discussion with our partners at the Women's Bureau in the U.S. Department of Labor so that we can continue to make equity and the rights of women the cornerstone of our investment in a job policy moving forward. Muchísimas gracias y sigamos luchando por trabajos dignos y por la dignidad del trabajo de la mujer. Thank you very much, and let's keep working to make women's work that is dignified with good wages and benefits. Thank you, and see you in our next session of our Equity in Focus series in June. I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you.